Picture this. You're the agency responsible for regulating America's biggest banks. Your job? To make sure they follow the rules. But what happens when you can't even verify your own employees? Well, in March 2023, the U.S. Office of the Comptroller of the Currency hired what they thought was a fintech superstar. 4 months later, he vanished without a trace. This is the story of how America's top banking regulator got conned by a resume so fake, a teenager could have spotted the lies. In March of 2023, the Office of the Comptroller of Currency makes a big announcement. They're launching a brand new Office of Financial Technology, and they found the perfect man to run it. Meet Prashant Kumar Bhardwaj, described as a 30-year veteran of the financial industry with master's degrees and an impressive track record. The OCC is thrilled. Acting Controller Michael Su calls him transformational. According to his resume, Bhardwaj had been the Chief Information Officer at Fifth Third Bank, managing a $330 million budget, CIO and Digital Transformation Officer at Huntington Bank, Director of IT at Citi, and the Managing Director at Accenture. The credentials were impeccable. The experience was vast. There was just one problem. None of it was true. By August 2023, something strange happened. Prashant Bhardwaj quietly disappeared from the OCC's website. No announcement, no farewell, he just vanished. Enter the investigators. In November, journalists from the Information and FinTech Business Weekly filed a Freedom of Information Act request. What they found was stunning. From 1994 to 2000, Bhardwaj claimed he was the director of IT at Citibank. Problem? He was 13 years old when his career supposedly started. 2006 to 2010, he was listed as the CIO of Fifth Third Bank. The bank's response? We never employed him. 2010 to 2015, claims to be CIO at Huntington Bank. The actual CIO during those years? Never heard of him. But wait, it gets worse. His MBA from something called the International Management Institute, Universitat de Brussels, which investigators described as a diploma mill. His CPA license didn't exist in any state database, and his 30 years of experience, well, that would have required him to start his career at age 12. Here's the kicker. The OCC has bank examiners permanently stationed inside Fifth Third, Huntington, and Citi as part of their regulatory oversight. These examiners work alongside senior bank executives daily. They would have instantly recognized that no one named Prashant Bhardwaj had ever held these C-suite positions. The irony was lost on no one. The agency responsible for making sure that banks verify their customers couldn't verify their own deputy controller. But here's what makes this even more shocking. A basic background check would have revealed more red flags. So according to due diligence reports, Bhardwaj had multiple DUIs and sealed records involving alleged domestic abuse. These weren't hidden. They were public records that any standard screening would have uncovered. This wasn't just resume fraud. This was a complete failure of the hiring process from top congressional Republicans demanded answers. How did this happen? What policies did Bhardwaj influence? The questions kept coming, but the OCC stayed silent. Banking experts were baffled. Todd Baker and Michelle Alt pointed out the obvious. OCC examiners are literally sitting inside these banks. They would have known if Bhardwaj had been a senior executive. The Tennessee Bankers Association put it bluntly. Even regulators need to do their homework. No criminal charges were ever filed. Bhardwaj simply disappeared into the regulatory ether, leaving behind a 4-month tenure and a massive credibility problem for the OCC. So how could this have been prevented? Well, here's what makes this even more shocking. In banking, employment verification isn't optional. It's standard practice. Executive level positions leave paper trails that are impossible to fake. Banks routinely run industry-specific background checks that would have immediately flagged someone who never worked at a major institution. But let's break this down. There are actually 2 layers of protection that failed here. First, if they would have used an automated resume validation tool like Verify, then things like the timeline of possibilities, like working at 13 years old, that would have been flagged. The diploma mill degree, an unaccredited institution, that totally would have been detected. Public record searches, there were no press release, speaking engagements, or industry mentions for someone claiming C-suite roles. That's a huge red flag. And secondly, of course, standard background checks. So things like employment verifications, like direct contact with the claimed employers, would have flagged. Professional licensing, like CPA databases and public and searchable. And then age experience mismatches. Again, 30 years experience at 42 years old, impossible. And then criminal background check patterns like multiple DUIs and other public records. So other industry-specific databases that track executive movements were never checked. The OCC had all the resources in the world, but Bhardwaj's background, they had examiners in the banks that claimed to work for. They had access to every database. They should have run the same checks they require banks to run on their own hires. What they didn't have was a systematic process to catch the lies before they became the headline. So the moral of the story is, don't let your next hire be your next headline. Try Verify for free and see what you might be missing.